You are the left, and you were a prisoner to the extreme left.
You think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party.
That means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Welcome back to AllStarBuzz. Thank you for joining us. And let's begin. Stephen A. Smith just appeared on The View on. Let me tell you, he destroyed the panel with nothing but basic common sense. He especially took down Sunny Hostin, who, with her overtly racist attitude, assumed that because he's black, he'd automatically agree with all her woke and racist viewpoints. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well for her. Now, here's the thing. Stephen A. Smith works for ESPN, which is owned by Disney, so to some extent, he's at the mercy of his corporate overlords. But he's got a YouTube podcast where, dare I say, leans into the realm of common sense, or conservatism, as it's otherwise known. Still, he has to be careful not to stray too far from the woke agenda, or he risks losing his job. That's why he didn't go fully nuclear on the ladies of The View. But let's be real, he didn't need to. All it takes is a little common sense, basic logic, and reason, and their arguments start to crumble like a house of cards. Now, watch as Sunny tries to lure him into her web of woke, delusional ideology. Trust me, it doesn't end well for her. Just watch.
So you think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay? But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that. These
That's
are
less than 1% of the population.
I understand that,
but you know what?
That's ridiculous.
Oh, and Sunny? With her snarky, condescending, elitist attitude? It's ridiculous. But you know what's even more ridiculous? Thinking it's okay to let biological males compete against women in sports. I'm sure the ladies of The View would have a huge problem with John Jones fighting a female UFC fighter. Or an NFL team completely annihilating and injuring a women's football team. Or a men's basketball team wiping the court with a women's basketball team. But as long as the man pretends he's a woman, suddenly his giant muscles and 6'6" frame don't matter? Give me a break. The physical differences between men and women? They're not just a dangerous concern when it comes to sports, they're a deal breaker. It's not just about safety, it's about fairness. It's about the opportunities, the medals, the tournaments, and all the hard work these women have put in to become the best at their sport. And for what? To come in second place to a man who's living out his weird fantasy of dominating women in sports? It's outrageous. And here's something else Sunny doesn't get. Just because something only affects 1% of the population doesn't mean it's not a big deal. If there are 350 million people in the United States, that 1% equals 3.5 million people. Do the math, that means you could easily have a biological male trying to compete in women's sports in every town across the nation. Even if it's just 1 or 2 per high school, that's more than enough for this to be a huge issue. Parents don't want their daughters playing against boys who've gone through puberty. It's common sense. But Sunny, she's rich, famous, and thinks she knows it all. She's college-educated and smarter than us. So why should she care about this issue, right? Wrong. We all know Sunny is one of the most racist and ignorant people out there. Of course, she's going to have a racist take on this. But before we get to that, let me show you her elitist take first. She goes on this rant about how everyone's uneducated and uninformed. Oh, and of course, she's the expert, she knows everything. She even has the nerve to say people need to watch more news to get informed. Like the news is some unbiased source of truth? Please. Anyway, just watch this.
But I think that's where the mistake is made.
Yeah.
You're saying it's ridiculous. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But most of the voters out there don't think like that.
But that means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information. If you're out there busting your tail to make ends meet and to pay your bills, and you're going to work every day, and you got a family to take care of, and you're in New York City, you're getting stuck 2 hours of your day, you're stuck in traffic. You understand? You got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. You don't have time to know what you and I know.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Well, again, I agree with that.
Not be uninformed.
you listen to stuff that's going to take you away from the things that brings down your spirit. And that's unfortunately what most voters are doing.
Let me ask you this.
Unfortunately, what most voters are doing is living in the real world. Look at how shocked Sunny is at the end of that clip. She can't believe that everyday Americans aren't sitting in their New York penthouses, like her, drowning in liberal propaganda. They're not buying the narrative that Trump is some existential threat to democracy, the rights of brown people and women. Nope, they're too busy worrying about the price of groceries, rent, and how to make ends meet for their families. For themselves, have individual preferences, and care about different issues. Just because they're the same race or ethnicity doesn't mean they all think the same way. But Sunny, she just can't wrap her head around that. And then she drops this gem. People from South America and Central America want to close the door on the people behind them. Seriously?
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to what you said about Black men being very comfortable with matriarchy. And I agree with that because, you know, Black households are often led by a grandmother, Black grandmother or Black mother.
That statement is implying that all Hispanics are illegal immigrants, that they all migrated here illegally, and now don't want more illegal immigrants coming in because, hey, they've already made it. That's not just wrong, it's racist. And for Sunny to say she's Puerto Rican but hold such a narrow-minded view about other Hispanics, it's absolutely baffling. Here's a thought, Sunny. Maybe they migrated here legally. I know that's hard for you to imagine since you seem to think all Hispanics are illegal immigrants. But no, maybe they want the border closed because they're legal American citizens who don't want illegal immigrants coming in and taking their jobs.
However, 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think that economically, they were looking at things. First of all, you've got, in this country, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, Colombians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you talk to the Hispanic community, depending on who you're talking to, they think differently. The Cubans think differently than the Dominicans. The Dominicans think different than Colombians. To some, the economy was a priority. To some, believe it or not, it was the border. You had some folks within the Hispanic populace that were encouraging the borders to be closed.
I'm Puerto Rican, right? So the Hispanic community is not a monolith. I agree with you. And a lot of, I think, people that are of Hispanic origin from, let's say, South America or Central America, they're willing to close the door behind them instead of letting somebody else in.
Or maybe they remember what drove them away from their home countries in the first place and don't want the U.S. to turn into the same mess. Ever think of that? There's only one real monolith in this country, and that's Black voters. Black people vote overwhelmingly for the Democrat Party, and yet they're also the poorest racial group in the country. Now, I'm not saying correlation equals causation, but it's hard to ignore the pattern. At the very least, Black voters should be split roughly 50-50 between parties, just like every other racial group. But they're no-tanned, that's a problem. Now, here's Stephen A. Smith breaking down why the Democrats lost the election. He says it's because they completely caved to the radical far-left wing of their party. And honestly, he's totally right. Watch this. I've said it before. The Democrat Party has shifted so far to the left that traditional liberals and Democrats who haven't changed their views find themselves in the same camp as centrist Republicans. Why? Because their party abandoned them to chase extreme ideologies. It's a mess. They abandoned their core beliefs, bent the knee to the woke radical wing of their party, and alienated everyone who didn't agree with their extreme positions. And now, voters don't trust them anymore. Here's Stephen A. Smith delivering one final blow to the Democrat Party. Watch this.
You are the left. You leaned and you were a prisoner to the extreme left in a lot of people's eyes. Well, guess what? Most of America doesn't operate on the fringes. Whether you're left or you're right, you're relatively centrist. You believe in compromise, negotiation, working with one another. Nobody gets to get everything they want. The problem is those on the fringes continuously push for you to get everything you want. They're not about getting things done. They're about getting their way. And if they're not going to get their way, they're about complaining and griping about it because they understand that when you are operating based off of grievance, that's usually what provokes you to get to the polls. And that is why they don't mind feeling aggrieved and displaying and disseminating that kind of message because they know people are going to gravitate to that. And as a result, that might get them to the polls, you thinking you're going to get what you want as a result of it.
But here's the thing, this is the confusion I've always had. Black people vote 90% Democrat, and I agree with Stephen A. Black people are suspicious of the system. But guess what? The system is the Democrats. Democrats are the ones pushing for an ever-expanding governmenta, bigger, more intrusive government. All they offer is free stuff. If you're a hardworking, self-reliant person who doesn't want low-quality handouts in exchange for your vote, the Democrat Party has nothing to offer you. And that's why they've got such a chokehold on the Black community.
One thing to recognize is this, and I've said this often. When we look at the economy, I remember when Biden came into the office, he inherited about 1.5% inflation. It ballooned to about 9.1% before it ultimately came down to where it is now, right? That doesn't mean anything to minorities. The percentage of inflation, and here's the percentage. Nah. How much does gas cost? How much does the groceries cost, okay? How much does rent cost? How much does my mortgage cost? That's what folks pay attention to, what's actually in their wallet. I don't know too many minorities that want to trust the system. And so when people speak, although you're right and righteous with your emotion and your righteous indignation, other people are saying we have the right to have righteous indignation when it comes to our pocket, or when it comes to our lifestyle, or when it comes to our environment. If we see crimes in the streets and stuff like that, we see homelessness and it's ballooned, we got a problem with that, and we don't believe this person is the answer compared to that. So what? They might have insulted a bunch of people. We don't like it, we hate it, but in the end, it's not more important than my pocketbook or my lifestyle. But you know what?
They've kept them addicted to welfare, broken up families, and trapped them in poverty. It's a cycle of dependency, and it guarantees their votes election after election. Think about it. The poorest group wants more free government stuff, and the Democrats are happy to provide it as long as they stay in power. That's why every other ethnic group is more evenly split between parties. But the Democrats? They're all about power and control. That's why their platform has become so radical, catering to the extreme woke left. It's not about helping people, it's about staying in charge. Let's break this down even further. The Democrat Party's strategy is clear. Keep people dependent, keep them angry, and keep them voting blue. They've convinced entire communities that they're powerless without government intervention. But here's the truth. The government isn't the solution, it's the problem. Think about it. For decades, Democrats have pushed policies that sound good on paper, but have devastating consequences in real life. Take welfare, for example. On the surface, it's supposed to help people in need. But what's really happened? It's created a cycle of dependency that's hard to break. Instead of lifting people out of poverty, it's trapped them there. And who benefits? The politicians who promise more handouts in exchange for votes. And let's talk about education. Democrats love to say they're fighting for better schools, but what have they actually done? They've pushed for policies that keep failing schools open, trapping kids in systems that don't work. Meanwhile, they fight against school choice, which would give parents the power to decide what's best for their children. Why? Because they don't want to lose control. They don't want families to have options. They want them to rely on the system. Then there's the economy. Democrats love to talk about fairness and equality, but their policies hurt the very people they claim to help. High taxes, overregulation, and endless spending don't create jobs or opportunities, they kill them. Small businesses, which are the backbone of our economy, get crushed under the weight of red tape and bureaucracy. And who suffers the most? The working-class families who rely on those jobs. But here's the kicker. The Democrat Party doesn't care about fixing these problems. They need these problems to exist. Why? Because if people are struggling, they're more likely to vote for the party that promises to fix things. It's a vicious cycle, and it's designed to keep them in power. And let's not forget the cultural divide. Democrats have embraced extreme woke ideologies that alienate everyday Americans. They've turned everything into a race or gender issue, dividing people instead of uniting them. They've demonized anyone who doesn't agree with their radical agenda, calling them racist, sexist, or bigoted. But here's the truth. Most people just want to live their lives, take care of their families, and be treated fairly. They don't want to be part of some political experiment. So what's the solution? It starts with breaking free from the cycle of dependency. It starts with empowering individuals, not the government. It starts with policies that promote self-reliance, opportunity, and freedom. And most importantly, it starts with holding politicians accountable for their failures. The Democrat Party has had decades to fix these problems, and they've only made them worse. It's time for a new approach that puts people first, not politics. They've spent years telling every brown person they're a victim, that they're oppressed, that the white man is bad, and that America is systemically racist. And their solution? If you want to fix these problems and get ahead, you need the government to step in and help you. But what does that really mean? A bigger, more intrusive government, that's what. It's all a power grab, plain and simple. They're taking advantage of desperate people, feeding them lies and keeping them dependent. It's a playbook as old as time, and it's disgusting. But what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Catch you in the next one.